School principals' practices during times of crisis, the case of improving schools. How did the COVID-19 crisis affect the school percentage of eligibility for matriculation? What did the school principals do to improve these percentages? How did they succeed despite the crisis? Researchers claim that the modern society in which we live is a risk society exposed to crises and uncertainties. At the global level, an expression of this was the COVID-19 crisis, and at the local level, the Iron Swords War that we are experiencing today is another expression. These crises are accompanied by changes in the learning and teaching arrangements, as well as organizational changes and changes in the physical spaces in which learning takes place, partly due to the closing of schools and the transition to distance learning. In light of these changes, we asked two main questions. 1. Did the schools that managed to deal with crises also manage to improve their school achievements in terms of matriculation eligibility? 2. What did principals do in these schools? In our research, we used data on all schools in Israel, in the Jewish state, Jewish religious state, and Arab educational sectors. We also had the opportunity to speak with 20 principals who, during COVID-19, succeeded in improving the achievements of their schools. We heard from each of them over the course of an hour. How exactly did it happen? But first, I will provide a brief background on what is known about school improvement in research. School improvement is a process that requires conditions and long-term processes. Previous studies on the subject identify several important factors and conditions that allow schools to be more effective and improve achievements and successes. 1. Effective principals are leaders with a clear school vision, which is focused on improving students' achievements and well-being. These principals are personally involved in pedagogical processes at school and show initiative and proactivity in leading necessary changes. 2. Professional teachers. These are involved teachers with pedagogical autonomy who work in cooperation and learn from each other. In addition, pedagogical training and continuous professional development of the teaching staff is of great importance. 3. The school has a positive organizational culture, which is based on instilling the school's values and learning norms among all partners, students, teachers, and parents. 4. Meeting the educational, emotional, and social needs of students of different backgrounds, along with setting expectations for high achievements and putting academic pressure on the students to maximize their abilities. 5. Collaborations between teachers, as well as involvement of parents and community, and even external expertise which can also help to improve the school. A combination of proactive leadership, professional teachers, a supportive organizational culture focused on learning and academic pressure, concern for students, and collaboration are key elements for the continuous improvement of schools, especially when it comes to schools that serve disadvantaged populations. During the COVID-19 crisis, school principals found themselves facing a different situation than usual. In addition to their role, which is complex from the start, they faced an immediate need to train the staff for innovative learning methods in a short time, logistical challenges related to technological infrastructure for the staff and students, a need for a lot of mental support, and concern for the physical health aspect of the teachers and students. All this was accompanied by the fear that the crisis would increase social gaps, as can be seen from evidence from many countries worldwide. To deal with the challenges of COVID-19, the Ministry of Education outlined an updated format for obtaining a matriculation diploma. Under this system, schools can base their assessments on internal grades, with the exception of select subjects: language, English, and mathematics. In these subjects, the tests remained external. Also, changes were introduced in the scope of the material, and students were given the option to choose between questions. In a long-term examination of the percentage of those eligible for matriculation at school from 2018 to 2021, based on a sample that encompassed all schools in the Jewish, Arab, and religious state education, the following trends were found. The percentage of students eligible for a matriculation diploma has increased. This mainly applies to schools in Arab education and schools with a low socioeconomic composition. In other words, the gap between the schools in the percentage of eligibility for matriculation narrowed during the COVID-19 years. This finding is surprising given the evidence that there has been a decrease in achievement tests in many countries following the COVID-19 crisis. A small increase was also found in the percentage of students entitled to a high-quality matriculation diploma with 5 study units of math. However, in this dimension of the matriculation diploma, which is considered to confer a high-quality matriculation diploma, the social disparities were maintained, with an advantage for religious state education. Regarding the differences according to socioeconomic status, the gaps have been maintained over the years. In general, we found that despite the challenges of the COVID-19 crisis, some schools managed to improve the percentage of students eligible for a matriculation diploma above what was expected according to the social and organizational characteristics of the school. The schools that achieved improvement were heterogeneous. 39% of them were state schools in Jewish education, 28% were state schools in Arab education, and 33% were religious state schools. Also, 34% of these schools were socioeconomically well established, while a similar percentage came from a low socioeconomic status. What did the principals do to improve their schools? We interviewed 20 principals from the 3 sectors of education, state religious, and Arab, and at different socioeconomic levels, who demonstrated an improvement in the percentage of matriculation eligibility over a 4-year period from 2018 to 2021. The interviews with 11 principals were conducted during the first 4 months of the war. So what did the 20 principals tell us about the key factors that helped them improve their schools? As in routine times and also during crisis, teachers are important and central to change and improvement. Does the team have technological skills? Good. And when you give teachers support and room for action, it's the best. The school staff's technology skills provided good infrastructure for dealing with the crisis. Some principals stated that a young team has an advantage in this aspect and can more easily and willingly adapt to changes and learn technological tools relatively quickly. Other principals said the older teams also showed abilities and willingness to upgrade. What did the principals do to help their teachers succeed during the crisis? The principal's support for the teachers during the crisis was on 2 main levels. In the pedagogical aspect, the principals trained teachers to use innovative technological tools. They provided quick assistance and held team meetings, training sessions, further training, and continuous support. In the emotional and social aspect, the principals showed flexibility and allowed changes in the school and in learning to take into account the needs and complexities faced by the staff. Fear of contagion, working with children at home, conscripted spouses, evacuated teachers, and more. The principals also held social activities for teachers for emotional and social support, and were available for the teachers for these needs. This aspect of support was more significant during the war. The management of the school principals and their staff in the face of the COVID-19 crisis and the war required an investment of work beyond what is acceptable in routine situations. To effectively deal with the increased load, principals have embraced decentralized positions. Working together was seen by the principals as a good strategy in situations of uncertainty. Most principals gave teachers confidence and a free hand to act. Very few principals strictly enforced and supervised teachers' work. The concern of principals during COVID-19 and the war was directed not only to the educational staff, but also to the students. Usually, the relations of the principals with the students are limited and mediated mainly by the teachers. However, in times of crisis, it seems that a closer and more direct relationship is formed between the principals and the students. The principals took care of the students both at the educational level and in an increased way at the social-emotional level. They followed a strategy of comprehensively assessing the students' educational, social, and emotional aspects and made sure they were continuously involved and updated on their situation. To obtain data on the students' learning and attendance, the school principals used various digital tools that were suitable for their school for the purpose of control and uniform work. These tools were chosen to suit the school's needs best. And what if the students lacked computers? The principal provided computers. And what if the student only attended a few classes? The principal called the student and their parents and sometimes even visited their home. And what if the student had other issues? The principal helped harness the student toward success and perseverance. The principals, along with the educators and professional teachers, were all involved in providing assistance to students at every level. The first thing that was important for principals to know about the students was their mental and physical condition. Their priority was to make sure the students were mentally well before addressing issues concerning academics and achievements. This issue stood out among the principals we interviewed during the war. While taking care of educational aspects, the school staff worked to support the students. In addition, the principals believed in their students and their abilities. They pushed and enabled students to fulfill their full potential, regardless of whether the school was of low, middle, or high socioeconomic status. A small number of principals did not believe that mental and social support can be given in a distance learning situation, and that mapping and identifying problems is not effective when there is no direct interaction with the students. At the level of the school's organization, it was possible to find 4 preliminary characteristics that characterize the school and most likely help them in dealing with the crisis. 1. Schools with a strong value base, where principals made sure they maintained values that existed in the school even before the crisis and continue to do so during and after it. Among these values are education for giving, respect, and personal treatment for students, education before achievements, leadership, and more. 2. Schools with a technological infrastructure that worked well even before the crisis. The presence of technological infrastructure and edge equipment, as well as early familiarity with technological tools such as mashov, feedback in Hebrew, Zoom, Google Classroom, and Microsoft Teams enabled rapid preparation and adaptation to distance learning. The choice of technological tools was made with careful thought and consideration to the needs of the school, staff, and students. But even in schools where there was no previous use of a distance learning system, the staff's quick mobilization and the principal's swift decisions allowed for rapid organization. 3. Schools with openness to innovation and changes, even in times of crisis. In these schools, the principals found a way to lead their teams of teachers and students in innovative technological ways, adapted to achievements and success. They continued to do so during and after the crisis. Some of them even saw the crisis as an opportunity and took advantage of the progress and changes that COVID-19 forced them to make, to further progress and upgrade the ways of teaching and learning even during routine times. 4. Previous experience in crisis management. Principals who had experience and early readiness for crisis handled it more easily. Several principals shared that their schools had previously experienced local crises and they had successfully steered their schools out of these situations. Therefore, their prior experience instilled in them a belief in their ability to operate successfully even during the COVID-19 crisis. One principal specifically noted that the distance learning exercises provided by the Ministry of Education, which were taken very seriously in his school, facilitated a smooth transition during this real crisis. Furthermore, the principals who were interviewed after the beginning of the war said that after they and the staff went through the COVID-19 crisis, they felt that the crisis of the war was a piece of cake. The principal stated that the COVID-19 crisis prepared them to deal with other crisis situations, such as the current war. The almost complete mobilization of most of the principals and their staff during the COVID-19 crisis and the war for the success of their students to maintain stability and personal contact stood out. This was expressed in personal concessions, which the principals and the teaching staff made during COVID-19 to help students in studies and other fields. Maintaining effective learning requires the enforcement of behavior rules and continuous attendance in classes. Each principal set their own rules in the school, which included reference to dress code, turning on cameras, and the like. This was to ensure the lessons would be conducted in a respectable and serious manner. When problems arose with class attendance, most schools turned to the parents for help. The principals also called students personally and turned the issue of attendance into a personal project in places where they felt a significant lack of student participation. Part of the learning management includes supervising the staff's work and the supply and conditions of the students. Some principals produced reports and information using the digital systems that served the learning. Some of them personally sampled lessons to get a feel for the situation. Other principals based themselves on outputs, products of the learning. In general, consistent mapping was needed to identify areas that required strengthening and areas where things were working properly. Principals enabled and encouraged openness and innovation, initiatives, creativity, and pedagogical independence. They often created a flexible timetable with few classes in combination with innovative learning and various types of tasks that develop independent learners and respond to emotional aspects of the students and staff. The transition to distance learning happened suddenly. The schools were thrown into a situation where they had to find quick solutions and ensure that all students have access to a stable framework as much as possible to continue learning without physical meetings. It was very noticeable that the principals stated that the organization for distance learning and innovative learning happened quickly in the schools. And at the same time, some principals managed to return some students to face-to-face learning before the rest of the system. The Learning Examining Bodkim Lomdim in Hebrew project, in which students were being examined twice a week, enabled the way for a safe return to face-to-face learning. Other principals created learning capsules and outdoor learning even before these measures became regular procedure. These principals mentioned the advantages they found for face-to-face learning over online learning. Some schools remained beacons for methods of dealing with crises and improvement for other schools and for the Ministry of Education, just as they were even before the COVID-19 crisis. Some of them continue to grow and develop in terms of the number of students and the pedagogical methods even during the COVID-19 crisis. And the Ministry of Education, how did it help? The Ministry of Education changed the matriculations. As noted, according to the matriculation guidelines during the crisis, the scope of the material was reduced. Some of the matriculations became internal, the exam dates were changed, and terms were added. And what did the principals think about it? The principals were happy and welcomed the changes, even saying that some of the changes could be implemented in the routine, except for two principals, who expressed queries and said that easing matriculation could create a situation where their students are not ready for academic studies. It's worth noting that there were principals who strongly emphasized the need to maintain the level of achievements, and provided a lot of reinforcement for this purpose. This issue stood out especially in the Arab sector. According to some principals, and particularly those serving disadvantaged populations, the changes not only advanced their students and improved their achievements, but also preserved the school's achievements. The adaptations provided an opportunity to push and encourage struggling students in approaching matriculation and succeeding. Indeed, more students received a matriculation diploma. However, it must be remembered that the quality of the diploma may vary, and may not necessarily be a high-quality matriculation with 5 math units. To do this, they were required to make changes in the study curriculum to fit the new examination guidelines. The reduction in the scope of the material allowed the teaching staff to delve deeper into the material being studied. The change for internal matriculation also allowed the school to work more consciously and in an organized manner, and to complete the matriculation at a time that suited them. These two adaptations allowed principals and their staff to manage time and learning in a more efficient and effective manner, which probably also resulted in reducing the social gap between schools. The vigorous activity of the principals happened at a time when they were facing quite a few challenges. The principals faced many difficulties when dealing with the various authorities, especially the Ministry of Education. The frequent changes in the guidelines, lack of contact and coordination with the field, decisions arising from extraneous considerations, and the need for greater autonomy compared to the ministry's requirements, piled up many difficulties and added burdens on the principals instead of easing them during the crisis. And after the crisis, the work never ends. A significant part of handling the crisis happens after it. The damage must be examined and repaired, and students should be helped when needed. To accomplish this, the principals try to recruit the necessary personnel such as psychologists, social workers, and others to provide emotional support within the system. Another educational solution is also required after the COVID-19 crisis, because according to the principals, the attention level of students has decreased. The principals are focused on making learning and school more engaging and effective by changing and updating learning methods and environments, including hybrid technological and innovative learning, which will respond to the students' needs and lead to their academic success. To conclude, contrary to the literature that indicates a decrease in achievements and widening gaps, we saw in Israel that the percentages of eligibility for matriculation increased and the gaps narrowed. However, in the high-quality matriculation certificate, which allows admission to prestigious academic degrees, the gaps seem to have been maintained and even widened. As we have learned from the evidence of the past, educational policies concerning matriculation exams can affect social disparities. But not only that, the processes the school principals and their staff lead are just as important. Like processes related to school improvement routine, such as emphasizing the significance of the staff and the space given to them to develop innovative and effective learning, mapping and supervising the students, and creating a positive organizational climate and cooperation, even during crisis, are all of great significance. Principals who possess clear values and guidelines with experience in dealing with internal crises and the ability to learn, develop, and manage a team succeed even during a crisis, as long as they have a mobilized and active team. During the crisis, the need for a closer and more direct involvement of the principals was exacerbated. In relationships and supervision of the students, in flexibility and adaptation to the crisis, in careful and coordinated mediation of the external guidelines, in maintaining stable and clear communication, and in providing broad and continuous support to the team. All this with an emphasis on the mental and physical well-being of the students and staff. A few recommendations. It is important that the training for principals includes an aspect of crisis management. In a society that has experienced many crises, crisis management skills should be part of the repertoire of principals. It is recommended to extend the autonomy of the principals. This empowerment will allow them to adapt and implement necessary actions during crisis, aligning them with the unique characteristics of the schools. In this context, it is recommended that an action plan for crisis be prepared with general guidelines, which will provide principals with ample room for maneuver and discretion. The readiness of schools. It is necessary to map the needs of the schools in terms of their technological infrastructures and their ability to adapt to innovative ways of learning from near and far, so that they can be quickly prepared for change during crises and regular routines. It is essential to train teachers to strengthen social-emotional skills as part of their work. This will contribute to the resilience of the organization and make it possible for teachers to provide a professional and meaningful response to students in both routine and crisis situations. The schools do not work alone. The participation of the wider community, including community services in the school area, will help schools to withstand crisis situations. It seems that the success of students requires the mobilization of all stakeholders, from policymakers to teachers. What comes next? It seems that social crises will continue to be part of our lives in the coming years. Schools and their principals will need to treat crises as part of their routine. This can already be seen during the war. What are the consequences of this situation on social gaps? This still requires further investigation. Thank you for your attention. For further reading, you can read the 2 research reports submitted to the Ministry of Education, which can be found by scanning the barcode or in the video description.